Welcome everyone to the Collective Mentoring webinar series, and thank you for joining us today. Today we'll be talking about mentoring youth in foster care, considerations and strategies. My name is Brian Sales. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance here at Mentor, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation, mentoring youth in foster care, considerations and strategies. Let's get started. This webinar is part of the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series, which is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention through the National Mentoring Resource Center and facilitated in partnership from Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. These webinars would not be possible without the planning team, which includes the mentoring partnerships shown on this slide. In addition to this webinar series, the NMRC provides resources for mentoring practitioners. At the end of this webinar, we'll provide more details about how you can access this free support. Before we get started, I wanted to share some housekeeping information. In 1 week, you'll receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides and view the webinar recording. You can also access this information directly by going to Mentor's website in the next week. And to continually improve this series, we're looking for your input. A short survey will pop up as you exit the webinar. Please take 3 minutes to give us your feedback. We thank you in advance. We want this to be a participatory experience, so please use the question box to answer your questions throughout the webinar. Audrey will be queuing up questions to share with panelists during the Q&A portion of the webinar. We may not get to all of the questions because there are several hundred of you on today's webinar, but we will do our very best. The questions that we do share with our panelists are generally ones that both broaden and deepen the conversation. First of all, let's get a sense of who's with us today. We have 2 short polls. Our first poll is, what is your experience level in the mentoring field? Beginner, experienced, or expert? Okay, it looks like most of you are beginners, 47%, and then we have a few of you who are experienced, and then 12% of you are experts. Let's launch our second poll. What is your role in the mentoring field? Are you a practitioner, a researcher, a technical assistance provider, a funder, or other? Great, most of you are practitioners with 51%, 32% are others, 7% are researchers, 5% are TA providers, and 5% funders. That's great. So now, at this particular time, we will turn it over. Let's do a quick introduction. We have today's panelists. We're very excited to have Dr. Heather Taussig from the University of Denver and from the Fostering Healthy Futures Mentoring Program. We have Colby Swetberg, licensed clinical social worker and executive director of Silver Lining Mentoring, and Tangina Sanders, program director of Youth Villages Mentoring Program. And our first presenter is Dr. Heather Taussig. She is a professor and the associate dean for research at the University of Denver's Graduate School of Social Work. Dr. Taussig's research focuses on developing and testing prevention programming for vulnerable youth, primarily maltreated children with child welfare involvement. She developed and directs the Fostering Healthy Futures program, an evidence-based mentoring program for children in foster care. She also conducts longitudinal research on risk and protective factors, child welfare outcomes, and policy issues related to child maltreatment and foster care. Dr. Taussig serves on the research board of OJJDP's National Mentoring Resource Center and served on the Colorado Governor's Task Force on Foster Care and Permanence. Dr. Taussig is an awardee for her work on child abuse and neglect from the International Society for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. We are so happy to have you. Dr. Taussig. Heather. I'll turn things over to you right now. Thank you.
Thank you for that nice introduction. I'm going to start by reviewing a review that my colleague, Dr. Lindsay Weiler, and I conducted this past summer, and it was published online in September of 2017 by the National Mentoring Research Center. As Brian said, I serve on the research board of the NMRC, and we conducted what is called a population review, looking at the science associated with mentoring youth in foster care. And we sought to answer 4 questions through our review. The first was, what is the effectiveness of mentoring for youth in foster care? So how well does it work in leading to the outcomes that we hope to achieve? Secondly, what factors influence the effectiveness of mentoring for youth in foster care? So for example, is mentoring youth in foster care more effective for young people who are in foster care, let's say, versus kinship care, or for youth with certain demographic characteristics versus others, certain ages versus others? So we looked at the research on that as well. We also sought to understand what the pathways are in terms of linking mentoring to outcomes for youth in foster care. So another way of thinking about that is, what are the mechanisms by which we might achieve, again, the outcomes we're looking for through mentoring with youth in foster care? And then finally, an implementation and sustainability question. We sought to examine studies that would answer the question, to what extent have mentoring initiatives for youth in foster care reached and engaged these youth, been implemented with high quality, and been adopted and sustained? So the review, we started out with 70 studies, published and unpublished studies, including dissertations. And in the end, we whittled it down to 30 studies that could answer those 4 questions I just delineated. We included studies of natural mentoring. One definition of natural mentoring is having someone other than a parent whom a young person identifies as a mentor, rather than someone they are formally matched with through a mentoring program. So we looked at studies of natural mentoring as well as program mentoring. And within the program mentoring bucket, we included studies of both individual and group mentoring, and studies that provided mentoring only, and those who had mentoring plus other program components. We looked at all contexts by which mentoring might happen: site-based, community-based, so obviously face-to-face, e-mentoring, etc. And our definition of the mentees included children and adolescents in any type of court-ordered out-of-home care. And I use out-of-home care, and will probably throughout this webinar today, as an umbrella term to include those in non-relative foster care, kinship care or kinship foster care, or congregate care, such as residential treatment or group homes. And they had to be placed in out-of-home care due to maltreatment to be included again in this population review. We also, somewhat differently from other population reviews, did include older youth, those transition age youth, ages 16 to 25 years old in this review, as long as the studies included some participants under the age of 18. So I think traditionally the population reviews have focused on youth, defined as those 18 or under, and we thought it was very important, especially for this population of young people, often who are emancipating, and there has been a focus specifically on providing mentoring to this transition age population, to include studies with this age spectrum as well. So what were our conclusions of the review, which it can be accessed online if you want more detail? What we found from our review of these 30 studies is that both natural and program-based mentoring appear to be highly acceptable to youth in foster care. And mentees generally report high satisfaction with their mentoring experiences. A lot of this comes from qualitative studies, which are asking the young people in a more open-ended fashion or through focus groups how they felt about mentoring, what pieces were important to them. And again, our review concluded that young people in out-of-home care really feel that mentoring plays an important role in their healthy development. A second conclusion was that mentoring across a range of ages and formats, so again, we talked about face-based or e-mentoring, those kinds of things, can have positive impacts on many, but not all, of the targeted outcomes that were studied across these studies. And the domains in which positive findings have been found include mental health outcomes, educational functioning and attainment. And by educational attainment, we're talking about, for example, high school graduation or attending college, peer relationships, placement outcomes, and placement outcomes might include, for example, an increase in permanency or a reduction in placement changes or placement in residential treatment. And finally, my personal favorite, always life satisfaction. Mentoring's been shown to, for young people in care, to improve their life satisfaction. When we looked at the mentoring types of programs that had been evaluated, most of the formal mentoring programs, again, that had been studied to date were multi-component. That is, they included components other than the one-to-one mentoring, such as skills groups or trainings or workshops, and they utilized mentors who were either agency staff members, so for example, from a child welfare agency, employees there may have served as mentors, or university students, either undergraduate or graduate student. So that doesn't mean that there aren't effective, more traditional community-based mentoring programs with volunteer mentors without other components, but the majority of the studies that we looked at had these other components and had, again, graduate or undergraduate students or agency workers serving as mentors. We also looked at whether the impact of mentoring differed based on demographic and placement characteristics. And while the science is still very young in this area, I would say there is some suggestion that the impact may differ in terms of outcomes for youth with different demographic or placement characteristics. So for example, kinship, being placed in kinship care versus foster care. But the literature is not comprehensive enough at this point to make definitive conclusions about that. When we looked at studies that examined what were key processes in achieving outcomes, we found that improvements in self-determination and pro-social skills might be the mechanisms through which mentoring outcomes are achieved for this population. Again, very early stages of this research. Our final examination was to review studies that had looked at implementation and sustainability of mentoring programs for young people in out-of-home care. And unfortunately, although there are many reasons why mentoring is an excellent fit for youth in foster care, as we will talk about today, as well as the challenges that make implementation difficult, there were no studies looking at broader implementation of programming and or sustainability. So we're really talking about studies looking at whether or not scaling up these programs can be effective and whether they can be sustained. So the literature is really out on that piece.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taussig, for your wonderful overview regarding the research on mentoring youth in foster care and the review. We really appreciate you sharing that information with our audience today. If you look at our slide right now, what we want to focus on is these four particular areas that are reflective of some of the standards around the elements of effective practice, specifically in terms of recruitment, screening, training, monitoring, and support. Much of the feedback that we received from the audience over the years around foster care mentoring is how it was the same or similar to traditional mentoring, but also how it was different. So at this time, what we'd like to do is to turn it over to several of our panelists to share a little bit specifically about their program and sort of touch on these particular areas and just delineate how their programs are both similar and a little bit different than sort of a traditional mentoring program. And we're very happy to have Colby Sweatberg, who is the CEO of Silver Lining Mentoring in Boston, Massachusetts. She's a former educator, and later on in her career, she was a social worker. And most of her work has been centered around working with young people. Prior to working at Silver Lining Mentoring, she worked at a large social service agency where she opened and oversaw a group home for LGBTQ teenagers, did clinical work in adoption and family stabilization team services. She also facilitated support groups for foster and adoptive families, provided training and consultation around the nation for LGBTQ youth and families. And in 2012, she was honored by Senator John Kerry for the Angel in Adoption Award for her advocacy efforts on behalf of youth in foster care. And in 2013, she received and was honored with the Women of Excellence Award from Youth Villages. And most recently, Colby was named a 2017 Barr Foundation Fellow. We are so happy to have you here, Colby. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. I'm pleased to be here and looking forward to hearing more from a larger group, as I know there's a lot of wisdom on the call. And thanks to Dr. Taussig for setting this up so nicely. Much to Dr. Taussig's previous point about how many mentoring programs that are working with this population of young people in foster care tend to be more than just mentoring. I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about our integrated service model at Silver Lining Mentoring, that we come at this work with a flagship program that is based in community-based one-on-one mentoring, and we offer some other components of the work that help to kind of add to the level of support that our young people have told us that they need over the years. So this is a basic description on this slide of how we think about our work as a three-pronged approach, our integrated service model. And the base of it is that flagship program, our mentoring relationships that are with long-term volunteer mentors. The mentors and young people are backed up by that right side of the triangle, our clinically trained staff who are all social workers who have trauma-informed clinical backgrounds and population-specific expertise. And then the programming in a more specific format for our young adults in preparation for aging out focuses on life skills and housing support. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on the next page. On the next slide, this gives us a better sense of how those programs kind of come together for our integrated model. And it's important to point out that our organization, Silver Lining Mentoring, was founded by an alumni of foster care. And that's key to our approach because we put voices of young people at the center of our work and come at the work from a strengths-based perspective, where young people in foster care have driven our program development, and that we always consider their voices first and foremost in thinking about what young people we need. We know that they are the experts. Young people are the experts on their own experiences, and they can tell us best what they need and how we can support them. So we put them at the core of our work and in our organizational development, and that's been since the beginning of our organization 15 years ago. We remain the only mentoring organization in Massachusetts exclusively focused on young people in foster care, and that gives us a pretty wonderful opportunity to be able to engage youth in care and those who have aged out of care in thinking about, again, how we can best meet their needs, knowing that this is a population that often has a lot of providers in their lives. For those of you who are currently working with youth in care, we know that there are caseworkers at the state level, there are judges and sometimes court-appointed special advocates. We know that there are clinicians in group homes, there are staff at residential programs, there are all kinds of people who are involved with them, and oftentimes young people in foster care lack connections with unpaid adults. And so our model takes advantage of the idea that every young person needs at least one adult in their corner who's crazy about them. And so we very specifically choose to use volunteer mentors for that reason. And oftentimes our mentors are the only unpaid adults in the lives of our young people. And we know that in the world of child welfare, turnover in staff is quite common at many agencies, that there are overburdened child welfare systems all over the country and under-resourced child welfare systems. And so often our young people are the ones who lose out the most as they start to develop relationships with providers who are caring and want to do well by our young people. They don't have the opportunity to develop longer-term relationships with them because folks change jobs. And so our model takes that into account as we say we want to put a volunteer mentor in place who commits to being with that young person for the long haul, that no matter whether the mentor changes jobs or the young person changes programs, they have a chance to stick together. So that community-based mentoring is the flagship program that I mentioned. It's that long-term one-on-one mentoring for youth in foster care. We serve young people as young as 7, and we don't have an upper age limit. One unique element of our model is that young people never age out of our services, so we'll continue serving them as long as they're interested in being engaged in the program. I'll talk more about the extensive screening and training process, but our commitment that we ask for up front is at least 8 hours a month for at least 1 year. But again, our hope is that they will be with us for the long term. We also offer LGBTQ specific mentoring for our young people who identify as part of the LGBTQ population and who have requested mentors who are also part of the community. And knowing that LGBTQ young people represent a disproportionate number of youth in the foster care system, we feel like honoring young people's experiences and identities is especially important for folks who don't see themselves in the world and who can't easily find role models. Our Learn and Earn program is the next one that builds on that age range as young people are preparing to age out. This is for youth who are ages 16 and older and really focuses on giving young people the skills that they need in preparation for the aging out process. It's also built on a one-to-one mentoring relationship, and it begins with a 12-week life skills boot camp that is centered around learning employment and financial literacy skills. We allow young people to attend this 12-week boot camp with their mentors. They're learning alongside their mentor. We give them dinner. They are learning these life skills in the context of experiential learning, and then they're going out and practicing the skills that they learn. And we don't ask them to choose between learning and earning. We give them the chance to earn money for their program participation by meeting different life skills milestones in the program. So they earn and save money through their participation, and when they save the money they earn, we match it dollar for dollar and give them the opportunity to save money toward independent living goals like rent or tuition or whatever it is that they may need for their next goals as they approach aging out or have recently aged out. So they come out of the program with life skills, with a long-term mentor, with the clinical support of our program team, and then also with the money that they've earned, saved, and had matched. Young Adult Services is for youth ages 18 plus. Oh, if we can go back a slide, sorry. So Young Adult Services is for youth who have recently aged out of care, and that includes support for finding and paying for housing and rental assistance. And then we also offer resource brokering to other resources in the community that they may need, most commonly mental health, employment, educational, and vocational resources. And finally, as I mentioned, our clinical support team is the team that backs up all of this work. We made the switch in our model a number of years back to ensure that all of our program staff are clinically trained social workers, and their trauma-informed approach helps to benefit both young people and their mentors, because we know that giving strong mentor support is absolutely essential, especially with our population of young people, and knowing that our mentors don't come in with the expertise of having been necessarily child welfare workers or youth experts, but that they need the support of folks who have a clinical background to help them in moments of crisis or when they need additional resources. One of the points that we're most proud of is that our match length is outperforming a lot of other mentoring match lengths, and we attribute that 55-month average match length to the incredible commitment of our mentors and the support that the staff team gives them to really stay in the relationship through all the tumultuous changes that young people can experience in the system. So I'm thinking about recruitment. The pieces that are most important in recruitment are starting with that commitment that I mentioned. We want mentors who are volunteering to be committed to the process, to going through the process with us and following the pace of young people, and they be committed to mentoring long term. Again, we ask for a 1-year commitment with 8 hours a month, but we hope they'll stay longer. Then we need them to demonstrate that they've got a stable lifestyle, that they're going to be grounded in the area for at least a couple of years, that they have 2 feet on the ground in terms of having a life that is somewhat predictable so that they can show up for youth, and that they're flexible. They won't be thrown off by the instability that often comes with life in the foster care system. Self-awareness is critical, knowing that our mentors can know their own limits, that they can be able to manage expectations, that they are youth-centered, not self-centered, and that they're not coming to be mentors because they're trying to fulfill an unmet need, that they're really there for the young people first and foremost. And then finally, in recruiting, we're looking for signals that potential mentors can meet rejection or challenge or change with consistency, because each of these things will happen, and likely multiple times. And the mentor needs to be the thread of consistency who continues to show up and validate and mourn and process and be the one person that youth can count on staying the same amidst all the changes that they experience through the foster care system. So on the next slide, we'll talk about screening a little bit. We have a fairly extensive screening and training process. We meet folks in the community in a range of different settings, and then we ask them to attend an hour-long information session, an hour-and-a-half long clinical interview with our social workers, to complete an application, to send along references and recommendations, and then we do some extensive background checks. So that's kind of our screening process, and the things that we're looking for in that process are that folks can demonstrate the ability to manage responsibilities of adulthood, so maintaining some combination of a job, housing, family, et cetera, and can follow through on the expectations and obligations that we put in front of them around deadlines and communication. We're looking for people who are open. So through the interview process, we're screening them, and people often joke with us after they've been through our 1.5-hour clinical interview that it can feel like therapy, and that's because they're sitting with a therapist and being asked tough questions about their lives and their backgrounds and who they are in the world and what their buttons are. And we need mentors to be able to engage in difficult conversations, because young people will inevitably bring up challenging topics and potentially ask personal questions, and maybe share or overshare personal information and test boundaries. So we need our mentors to be non-judgmental. So we're talking about value judgments and implicit assumptions that come up in the interview and screening process. And we're looking for an openness about what young people and their families are up against and why they may be engaging in challenging behaviors or patterns. And then last, we're looking for them to unpack their identity. And what we mean by that is that they're understanding where they fit into the world, their own identity, their family, their privilege, their experiences, in terms of how they move through the world themselves, and then how a young person will see them. So we're looking for a true ability to look at themselves and what they carry around with them, both knowingly and unknowingly, in the invisible backpack of privilege related to race, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, ability, education, family experiences, all kinds of identities that may be similar to or quite different from our young people. And the ability to recognize that early on is important. It's worth saying that we don't expect perfection anywhere, except we expect consistency in communication and follow through during the screening process and through training. And even the slightest hint of inconsistency gives us pause and makes us reevaluate, or at the very least call in the candidate to talk things over, because we've learned a lot about inconsistency in the past, where we've given folks the benefit of the doubt and then have found that it's youth who suffer in the end if adults are inconsistent, if mentors can't show up or communicate in the ways that we set expectations for them to do. And 99% of the time, our staff's clinical judgment leads to the selection of excellent mentors. And if we have any less stringent screening processes, that can lead to ultimately greater losses for young people. So I can't emphasize that process enough. On the next slide, as we think about training, this is an 8 to 9 hour in-person training that all of our mentors do before they ever meet any young person in our program. We talk a lot about clear expectations, what mentoring is and what isn't. We make it clear that this is not a kind of link arms and walk off into the sunset kind of perfect scenario. If that's what you're imagining, we want to set expectations early on, that even though you say that they want to mentor, they're opting into our program, their behavior may not always show that out front. And we want to be able to manage mentors' expectations about how quickly young people may attach or not, and what mentors can expect from staff and vice versa, how they should use us for support, that we don't expect mentors to have all the answers, that we want them to reach out and talk through what they're coming up against, and talk through our relationship with the child welfare system. As we think about understanding the population and understanding risks and resilience, we want them to know what the behavioral effects of trauma are and how it manifests in a relationship with a mentor that young people may not yet trust. We want them to know what to expect in terms of frequent moves, that youth in foster care often are moved and without any notice, without necessarily having a sense that it's even happening that day, and what kinds of disruptions that can cause in their lives that could affect the mentorship. And then the risk factors that young people in foster care are up against because of the way the child welfare system operates and the way trauma and or abuse and neglect have played a role in their lives. In the training, we talk a lot with our staff about not ignoring red flags, that if we see red flags, they're often indicative of bigger issues. So, for example, a red flag is when we stop hearing from a mentor regularly. We wonder if they're going to be able to be in touch with a youth, or feel like they've screwed up and feel badly, or if they're comparing their young person to other kids in their lives, like their own kids, or kids they may work with. So we were very careful to talk about what the relationship is and isn't, and we want to make sure that that's explicit from the start, so that there's no sort of question around what could be misconstrued as what a mentoring relationship could or should be. And then we also talk about closure, which is surprising to a lot of people, but this is important because during the training and from before the time when the relationship with a young person even begins, we talk about potential endings and how important intentional closure is. That if it has to happen, we want to make sure that it's handled very carefully, because we know that we all handle closure differently in our own lives, in our personal lives. Most people don't like goodbyes, and some people aren't particularly good at them. And so we are very protective of the closure process with youth in foster care. Again, back to that point earlier about they often don't have control. They don't have choice or voice when it comes to being moved and having closure with relationships. They're often pulled from circumstances very quickly without notice. And we want the mentor to be somebody who they can count on to have a different kind of healthy closure. So if the mentor is someone who avoids goodbyes, we're upfront about the fact that that cannot happen with youth in care. We need our mentors to let us help them handle it responsibly. We know that life happens and that closure does happen sometimes. And so we want to usher that into an experience that's positive for both sides. In thinking about training messages on the next slide, this is just where we reiterate some of what we've already talked about. So thinking about the long term, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So we want folks to be consistent. We want to stay strengths-based and youth-focused. We emphasize that youth and families do well if they can. Young people's behavior may not always be obvious about what they're struggling with, but they're doing the best they can with what they've got. We want mentors to learn and not judge, so to get curious about what they're seeing. And we talk about the fact that when changes happen, it's more about the internal process of transition than the external event of a change. So we talk about the transitions framework and how it can help mentors to understand what might be going on for young people internally. Quickly, the matching process, as we think about what we're looking for when we make those matches, we want mentors to know that it has to be all about the youth. We do not force chemistry, and we are patient, and we ask our mentors to do the same. So we need them to meet youth where they are. We ask, mentors if they have preferences about geography, but if mentors have lots of preferences and have a very specific picture of the kind of young person they want or don't want, that's a red flag for us. So after geographic preference, we really go to the youth's preferences and consider what we know about the mentor's personality to make a successful match based on what the young person is looking for. And the young person has the final say in determining who the mentor is. So we get all of the OKs from the adults, the child welfare system, caregivers first, and then the young person, we present them with a mentor and say, we think we found someone for you, here's their profile, here's what we can tell you about them. And if the young person says, no thank you, doesn't feel like a match, we say, okay, I'm gonna go back to the drawing board. So that keeps them in the driver's seat. We're communicating with stakeholders, making sure that many people are involved in the process, and we want them to understand the challenges of the process. And as I mentioned, the youth have the final word. We know that mentors can handle disappointment. So when the mentor approves the match first, we know that the young person then can make the final decision. In terms of monitoring and support, we do a lot of this. Support is key, as I mentioned, to long-term relationships. And so we think about those regular check-ins, regularly reaching out to be proactive in supporting mentors, not just waiting for them to call us if there's a moment of crisis, but developing the relationship so that they can ask for help. Over communicating around transitions when young people move or there's a crisis in their lives. Helping mentors to predict the changes in their lives and milestones that they may be coming up against, like anticipating aging out or a DCF worker changing, things that could trigger a big response from youth so that mentors can consider what changes in the past have looked like and how best to support the youth through changes in the future and what those might trigger. And then that mentors can be the relationship historians. They can help young people to navigate tough times, and our staff do that by helping the mentors know what worked well in the past, and they can help them do things like keep pictures and mementos and scrapbooks that often for youth in foster care get lost through the various moves. And then closure, of course. This is something that we talk about, as I mentioned, from the very beginning. We don't want mentors to avoid the topic of closure. If life happens and they have to move, they have to end the relationship before they wanted to, we make sure that they don't put guilt in the driver's seat and they don't shy away from the goodbye, but that they turn around and with us help to talk with the young people about why they need to end a relationship and what realistic expectations they can put in place. So healthy endings look like celebrating successes and reflecting on the relationship, how they've seen each other grow, reflecting on favorite memories and wishes for the future. And then we talk about what those real expectations look like in terms of contact. You know, if they say, oh yeah, we'll be able to see each other, we'll be able to talk regularly, we talk to the mentor before we bring the youth into the conversation about what is actually realistic. If what you can commit to is calling 4 times a year or sending a card, don't overcommit. So we'd rather you over-deliver and under-promise, and so that we are ensuring that we're never setting young people up for another loss. And then finally, this is just a message from a young person that we'd like to share, that lots of people may have dropped out on me, says this young person, my teachers, my family, but don't you do it. That doesn't mean that you can't ever leave. I understand that you may have other commitments and other things to do, but at least be my friend. Sit down and explain to me why you can't be with me anymore. Don't just desert me. If you're not willing to stick with me when I'm obnoxious, don't start in the first place. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that, Colby. I think we may have time for one question. Audrey, I think you have a few questions, but maybe just ask one question. We'll give Colby an opportunity to maybe speak to one of the questions that popped up.
Absolutely. So you had mentioned that there are a couple, I guess, primary criterion that you're looking for when you're recruiting and doing screening. So commitment, stable lifestyle, being self-aware, and ability to meet rejection, challenge, and change with consistency. And I was just wondering, what are the indicators that you're specifically looking for? And do you have any successful strategies that you could share with our audience for how you find these individuals specifically?
Yeah, so it takes, this is another reason why we have a clinical program team. I have to say, I get calls from all over the country and even beyond internationally from well-intentioned folks who want to start programs for mentoring youth in foster care and say, oh, you know, I have some volunteers or a group of friends and we want to put a group together because we think we can do mentoring for youth in foster care. And a lot of what I try to do is set realistic expectations by saying, our young people in foster care deserve all of the support that we can give them. And we've learned over the years that it can't just be reliant on the good intentions of a few volunteers or even many volunteers, that you need professional staff backing up those mentors who are showing up and volunteering or giving their time in some way, but that it's the staff screening process, it's the staff monitoring and support that really gets us to recruit and find the right mentors to drill down on those skills and understanding what a stable lifestyle looks like, understanding what commitment looks like. So it's not just that good intentions lead to good impact. We've definitely seen the best of intentions end up with another loss for young people who've already experienced too many losses. So it's in-depth conversations with people about what their lives actually look like, what their other commitments are in their lives, what their family structure is like, what kind of time they have, how much their work plays a role in their lives, what pressures they face, where else they're being caretakers and nurturers. Understanding how they talk to us about themselves and their own limits, knowing how much space they take up in a room when they're in a group training. We screen people out who don't know how to share airtime. We've recognized over the years that if adults in a mentor training are the ones that are always, answering questions and have long answers and long questions and are speaking a lot and not making space for other adults to speak, they're probably not going to be able to make much space for youth to speak. So we talk to them about that and tell them what we're noticing. But for adults who don't have that level of self-awareness, they end up being a more challenging match for youth in foster care, because we want, again, the youth to be at the center of the relationship. So in looking for these things, we're asking them a lot of in-depth questions, and that's why it's not kind of a big mass message that, hey, anyone can do this, everyone can be a great mentor. We actually don't believe that anyone can be a great mentor. We think that for this population, there is a skill set and a deeper level of commitment and knowledge that's important, and that persistence and stick-with-itness is really key. So we're asking them to give us examples of times that they've endured challenging moments or gone through hardship, and to talk to us about what their role is. Not that there's any one right answer, but that we're listening for certain skill sets and the ability to self-reflect.
Well, thank you very much, Colby. At this time, we're going to go ahead and turn things over to our new presenter. Tangina Sanders, since 2002, has been working for youth villages in Memphis, Tennessee. She's a community-based therapist for young adults transitioning into independent living. And in 2005, she was asked to take over the management of the organization's mentor program. During that transition, the program grew from serving approximately 30 youth to over 100. It was then that former Tennessee Governor Phil Bredston offered youth villages a 4-year grant for Tangina and her team to assist the state with the creation and management of a mentoring program that would serve over 300 youth annually in the Tennessee foster care system. In addition to her role at youth villages, Tangina volunteers through the Memphis Grizzlies Mentoring Alliance as a training institute facilitator, teaching others mentoring programs how to align the elements of effective practice. Thank you, Tangina. We're glad to have you here today.
Thank you, Brian. I'm glad to be here as well. And I think I might have been happier to go before Colby. That was great information. I enjoyed myself, so I hope that it won't sound too repetitive as I go through our organization's plan. Youth Villages is an organization. It's a nonprofit that helps children and families live successfully. And through that, we have several programs available to meet the needs of families that need some additional support. Some of those include the intensive in-home services, where we work in-home with families that just need a little additional support to have a successful family environment for their children. We offer foster care and adoption services. We have residential and intensive, we have intensive residential treatment. We also manage the runaway and homeless shelter for the city of Memphis, for the state of Tennessee. And we offer LifeSet, which is a program for young adults aging out of custody. In each of these programs, we offer mentoring. And the one we're going to talk about today, obviously, is how mentoring in our foster care system currently works. And while we started in Memphis in the early 80s, we are now a national organization that serves 12 states and the District of Columbia. And so while we have services in each of those 12 states and DC, we get referrals for young people from 44 states across the United States to come to Memphis to experience the unique treatment model that we offer. So talking a little bit about recruitment for the young people that we work with, I think, well, for starters, we're a well-known organization in the city, and so we have current partnerships with organizations that are already working with youth villages as donors, organizations that participate in monthly volunteer opportunities, or organizations that just support us financially. Typically, once organizations get involved, their individual employees find out more about our young people and want to do more. And so we do recruit a lot of mentors to work one-to-one with our young people after a person has come on board and spent some time with a young person. We also have a great opportunity in the city of Memphis, where our mayor has initiated did a campaign several months ago where they offer their employees 5 work hours a month, 5 work hours a week to participate in mentoring in the community. And we are fortunate enough to be one of the programs that the mayor promotes. And so we get mentors coming to us through that city campaign, which is great because for those people who feel like they don't have enough time to carve out their personal life to be involved as a mentor, this is an opportunity for them to take out of that 40-hour time slot that they've already been committing to going to work each week to donate to an organization in our city by serving young people. So it's a very, it's been great for our whole mentoring community in Memphis. And we, some people just are looking for opportunities, and so they will just research the web looking for mentoring, because I think over the years mentoring has gained such a great reputation of its positive effectiveness that people know that seems to be what they want to do and how they want to get involved in serving a young person. So people just come to us through that natural recruiting process. Our employees can be mentors as well, and a lot of times they're fantastic mentors. A lot of our youth have emotional and behavioral issues, and when we have someone like that we're concerned about plugging in a community person as a mentor for them, it's nice to have a trained employee work with that young person. Obviously, it's an employee that doesn't provide any direct care services to them, so that it's a separate role for both the mentor and the youth, having that employee as a mentor. And so talking about that, and reiterating some things that Colby said as we're screening people. Mentoring, we know the statistics nationally and the positive percentages that we see, but when it's not done appropriately or correctly, it can be devastating for a young person. And for this vulnerable population of foster youth, they've already experienced possibly a lot of abuse and neglect, but we know their situation has created a host of emotional and developmental needs for them. And so as we look for people, we want to be sure that they understand this population that we're working with. So we spend a lot of time on the front end preparing them and getting them through this screening process. It's the same screening process that our employees go through as well. And so this 1 hour of a face-to-face individual interview is very important for us to really have an opportunity to get to know this person. We ask some pretty critical questions during that time so that we get a feel for their answers or how they react to some of the questions that are presented to them. And then we see them in a group setting, which is a mandatory 2.5 training with other applicants that are coming through the system. We want to see how they interact with each other, how they respond to each other's statements during some of the interactive portions of our training. And then we offer quarterly trainings. We want to make sure that our mentors stay trained. They don't fall into a place of comfort where they're not able to be prepared to handle a situation that may come up during the course of their role as a mentor. We also ask mentors to commit to 4 to 6 hours a month. We feel like anything less than that, there's a concern as to what exactly the relationship is between them and the young person. So we want to be sure that during this screening process that we can evaluate that they are in fact able to carve that out of their personal life. And also being a great listener, being encouraged and supportive, patient and flexible, and very tolerant and respectful of the individual differences. We've got a host of variety of mentors with different backgrounds, and our young people come from all kinds of different backgrounds. So we want to be sure that the adults that we're bringing into the program understand that and know that they're going to be working with young people from all different backgrounds. Okay, so then talking about screening, excuse me, that was screening. Let's talk about training. This is so important, and we try not to rush our applicants through training because we do feel like if we can get a lot of things clear at this time, then we have a better chance of having a successful mentor join our team and a chance for a better mentoring relationship for the young people that they work with. And so the population that we work with at Youth Villages is somewhat unique to other mentoring programs here in that a lot of them do struggle with emotional and behavioral issues. There's a clinical team that's assigned to every young person that's receiving services through Youth Villages. And so we want to take the whole team, the clinical folks that are involved, the foster families and their support team. They have counselors assigned to them. They have supervisors in the foster care program that are assigned to this team. And we bring everyone together during the training to make sure everyone understands their role and that we understand how each of us is going to impact that portion of the child's experience at Youth Villages. And once we know that we have all of that ironed out and everyone understands, we feel like it does assist in creating a successful relationship between the young person and their mentor. And so we want to also just go through some basics of talking about confidentiality, ways to schedule visits, ways to cancel visits, mandatory reporting, healthy boundaries, some of the very basic things, but also giving the mentors the emphasis of these things for foster youth and how they can be slightly different for other youth in other programs. When we have a foster parent involved and they are dealing with education and behaviors and health care, all of these things for the young person, and then we bring a mentor in, we want to make sure that we keep that mentor in the role that they're to be and make sure that the foster parent understands what that is. They're not going to assist them with some of those clinical elements, but yet be the friend and support for the young person, that they're here for the young person, not necessarily for the adults. Okay, so talking a little bit more about training is, again, keeping everyone safe, talking about do's and don'ts for mentoring. And again, the main goal here is just to fully prepare this volunteer to know what they may run into and how they're going to handle that. They are each assigned to a liaison, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the next portion. But that if they understand all of these things, because mentoring can be difficult, and mentoring children in foster care can be even more difficult. And so again, we want them, before we actually place them in front of a young person, we want to expose all of these possibilities and make sure that they feel fully equipped to manage them. And so then going into monitoring and support, this too is we consider extremely important. Once we feel like we've gotten a fully trained applicant on board, then we want to be sure that they get the support that they need to be a positive influence for our young person. And so they're assigned to a mentor liaison that checks in with them during the first 30 days of a match, which we feel is very critical. The mentor liaison is going to check in with all of those key people that we talked about in the support system at least 2 times during that first month, making sure that once we've made the match, we let everyone know that it's kind of a probation period for everyone. We put a young person and adult together that we have somewhat minimal information on, and we hope that it's positive, that we hope that it's a successful match, but it's not always. So we're very open and honest with that in the very beginning, so that it gives the young person or the mentor the opportunity to say, I'm not sure that this is a good match for me. And before we get too far into the relationship where the young person has become disinterested or the mentor just feels like the easiest out is just to kind of fade out and discontinue communication, we say, okay, we're following up during this 30 days to find out how everyone's experience is going. Is it what you thought? Are you getting the support that you thought you were going to get? And that way, then once that 30 days up, we kind of give everyone the, we've made it past the 30 days, everyone seems happy, so we're going to continue this relationship. Or we can come back and say there's some things that we want to address that came up during this 30 days, so let's come back and have another face-to-face and visit with everybody so that we can see what things need to be ironed out. But once that 30 days is over, then the liaison continues to contact that mentor, youth, foster parent, counselor at least one time during the 30 days, but they are available 24/7 to any of those individuals that are a part of the support team for the young person. But during that contact, we are documenting the reports that we get back from the youth, what they're saying is going on during their visits, how often they're visiting, what concerns may come up. And I think, actually, I might be getting ahead because I have the templates next. But the main thing we want to do is make sure that everyone, yeah, here's the template. We want to ask questions for the mentee to give them an opportunity. We're a safe person for you to disclose any concerns you're having about this relationship, because they may not have felt comfortable enough disclosing those to their foster parent or to the mentor. And this way, we're asking open-ended questions that allow them to share any information, and we ask it, continually, so that they know we are there, making sure that the relationship is healthy, they're getting what they expect to be getting out of it. But once the next slide talks about meeting, we also ask questions from the mentor. But again, then we're cross-examining the answers that we get to make sure that everyone's doing, that what people are saying is happening is actually happening. And we're being able to safeguard the experience that our young person is having with this adult that we've brought into their lives. And we have had situations where that cross-examination did not come together on the same, in the same place, and so we were able to question, well, the young person did say this, but yet this is your report. Please explain, why we're seeing some differences here. But it's just very important to us, once we have made that match, that everyone knows we are going to be walking side by side with them to help them, to be evaluating what's going on, and then we feel like with that level of support, we have a better chance of keeping a mentor in place with this young person longer, which then positively impacts the youth greater. We hope that if this relationship gets off to a good start, is shepherded during the course of the relationship, then we're looking for lifelong friendships from some of these matches. And we have seen that, and we encourage that. And we feel like that's the greatest benefit for some of these young people going through the foster care system.
Thank you very much, Tangina, for that wonderful overview. Let's just turn things over to Dr. Heather Taussig. Heather?
Thank you. I'm going to talk briefly about our Fostering Healthy Futures program because we want to make sure we have time for questions from webinar participants today. If you want more information, I think my email address is going to be shared through the chat box, and I'm happy to send you some published papers and more information about our program model after the webinar. So Fostering Healthy Futures is a program that was developed initially for preteens. It is a time-limited mentoring program, 9 months. It runs along the academic year for children ages 9 to 11 who were recently placed in foster care. And in addition to the one-to-one mentoring, which is provided by graduate students in social work and psychology, children attend a skills group for 30 weeks. And the skills group was specifically designed for children in foster care, and it now is a manualized group program, really focusing all of the programming components on being strengths-based and empowering for young people. We have tested the Fostering Healthy Futures program in 2 rigorous randomized controlled trials funded by the National Institute of Mental Health primarily and other local foundation funders. And the program is now listed on about 8 registries of promising and evidence-based programs. Key findings from our research suggest that those children who participated in the Fostering Healthy Futures mentoring program compared to those in a control group evidenced fewer mental health problems, including trauma symptoms, fewer placement changes, less placement in residential facilities, greater permanency, as well as the cost savings, specifically from the foster care daily rate going down for the group of young people in the Fostering Healthy Futures program compared to those not in the program. And the program, the preteen program, is currently being implemented through community-based agencies, as this was initially developed and tested within a university setting. We are currently testing an adaptation of Fostering Healthy Futures for teens, and we're running another rigorous randomized control trial to look at the outcomes. The teen program does not have the skills group component, so the mentors are implementing skills training through their individual mentoring visits. And I'll just go through the next couple slides real quick. Again, happy to share additional information. So in terms of our recruitment and screening, again, we're using graduate students who receive training through our program for their and field placement credit. They, in the preteen program, each mentor one-on-one 2 children. In our teen program, they're each matched with 3 children. And we recruit graduate students from several local universities. They apply to be mentors, and we conduct in-depth interviews and as well as background and reference checks. And a lot of the things that Tangina and Colby spoke to are important characteristics of graduate students as well, who we are pairing with young people in out-of-home care. In terms of our orientation and training, the next slide, we do a full 3-day orientation covering a host of topics, which I'm not going to read through, but you will have access to these slides afterwards. But just a key piece is that young people create life books through our program, and that helps them generalize the skills that they're learning in skills group to the real world through their mentoring work, or through their mentoring relationship. And then finally, on the last slide, monitoring and support. Although they are graduate students, or maybe even because they are, they receive the following training each week. They have individual and group supervision. They come to a seminar, and some of the topics are listed there below. They also get training on the skills group with a group leader, and our supervisors are on call anytime our mentors are potentially meeting with young people, which can be a lot of hours outside of traditional working hours, obviously. So I think I will end there so that we can open up the webinar to questions. And again, I'm happy to send folks more information on our program model and outcomes if you email me directly.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. I'm going to turn things over to our question moderator, Audrey Siegfried from Mentor, Colorado. Audrey, do you have a few wonderful questions for our audience?
We sure do. This has been such an excellent group. I've been getting questions throughout the webinar. So I've selected a couple highlights. So the first question is, we've been kind of focused on our discussion around recruitment, screening, training, monitoring, and support to help us to develop long-term relationships and avoid closure. But what happens if closure isn't handled properly with these young people specifically? Are there any additional risks for premature closure with this population of young people? And that question can go to any of the panelists.
This is Tangina, and I'm going to say absolutely. Young people, lots of young people go through traumatic situations, but primarily for foster care youth, they're seeing a lot of changes in staff, in caseworkers, in foster parents, and so if closure isn't handled appropriately, it can be just another negative impact for this young person and can either give them a bad taste for mentoring and not allowing another person to come on as a mentor, or just it can affect their self-esteem and make them feel poorly about themselves that the relationship wasn't successful. They weren't given good information as to why the closure occurred.
I think this is Colby. I'll just add on to that. I think even kind of bigger than the mentoring piece is their sense of guilt that young people often take it on and feel like it was something that they did, that they feel responsible for and at fault for ending the relationship ending. And we know that that's already a prevalent feeling among young people in foster care, that somehow they may have brought on the maltreatment that they experienced, which we know is absolutely not true. So this is further triggering the trauma that they've already experienced. And then the piece around developing trust, it further kind of emblazons that pathway in their brains that says that adults are not trustworthy because they have been hurt in the past by adults. And so why should I trust another adult if this person said that they were going to be around long term and then they couldn't fulfill their obligations? So just to underscore that point, that it is so critical to get people who are committing to mentoring to really understand the true responsibility and obligation to the young people, and that it is better to never introduce them to a mentor at all than to introduce them to someone who's not going to fulfill their obligation and to be there for at least a year. The research is very clear about that, that it actually does more harm than good, as has already been said. So even though people have good intentions, we know that if they can't follow through and make it be consistent in their relationship for at least a year, it's actually not worthwhile. So it's critically important to get that right.
And this is Heather, and I would just echo all of that. And you did Colby, just speak to the research literature. I would point people to Renee Spencer's work at Boston University, and she has really looked at the impact of mentoring relationships that don't end well, and highlighted the fact that more vulnerable populations, such as children in foster care, are more susceptible to mentoring relationships ending prematurely. And even though we have the Fostering Healthy Futures program, which is time limited and everybody knows when they start, it is going to be the academic year and end, we spend a significant amount of time training our mentors on how to end relationships in a healthy way with the young people. And we also train young people in thinking about how to end a relationship that can be sad but non-traumatic. And we think that can be really a corrective experience in some ways for young people to have a relationship end in a non-traumatic way, because so many of their relationships formerly have ended in that way, and to be able to process that, we think can be very therapeutic. I want to just add one other piece in my reflection of listening to all of us talk about programs, is that all of us have a clinical lens as we approach our work with young people in out-of-home care. And given their unique vulnerabilities, I think that's really important. So I just wanted to echo, again, what Tangina and Colby had said about how important the recruitment, screening, training, and then, again, closure is in leading to positive outcomes for these young people.
Excellent. Thank you all. Do we have time? Yeah, I was going to say, do we have time for another question?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So this is kind of a big picture question, but I think it's really important considering the young people that we are serving in these programs. And so what are some of the most common ethical and legal issues to be aware of when working with foster kids specifically? And this can go to any of the panelists. So any of those common ethical or legal issues that might be slightly more present when working with foster kids than some of the other populations of youth.
This is Heather, and I think, what we just spoke to in some ways speaks to the ethical piece around, vulnerable young people. In terms of legal, partly our program has a research component, but even if it didn't, from a clinical or a program perspective, we need to be sure that legal guardians are always giving approval for young people to be involved in our program. And for young people in care, legal guardians can change pretty quickly, and sometimes without the knowledge of mentors or programs, because, for example, custody may be transferred from the county or the state to a kinship care provider. And so it's important, I think, that we recognize from a legal perspective who can give approval for young people to participate. Obviously, we always want the young person to have agency and be able to decide whether or not they want to continue. But from a legal perspective, the changes in guardianship and present some unique challenges that aren't seen in mentoring programs for young people who are not in care as often.
This is Colby. I think I would just add to that and say that the aging out process can present some particularly thorny issues for youth as they age out of care. And we know that that's when young people and mentors need extra support in navigating that aging out process, because there are so many losses that come with aging out of care, and it happens for young people at different ages depending on their state and local laws, but most often it's around 18 and sometimes up to 21 or 22. But at that point, there can become some ethical issues that surface, because oftentimes foster care is a pipeline to homelessness, and young people find themselves aging out of care and quickly without a place to live. And so we know that mentors in the past have bumped up against, well, should I just offer my young person, the opportunity to stay with me for a while? And we talk mentors through that and the challenges that presents, because the last thing we want to do, oftentimes, as I mentioned, our mentors are frequently the only adult in this young person's life who's not paid to spend time with them. So all these other providers drop out of sight. The mentor's the only one left. And if the mentor then opens up their home and has the young person staying with them, and as has happened before, eventually that doesn't work for whatever reason, either an expectation changes about the length of stay or the rules in the house or whatever, and that relationship ends, that young person is left with nobody. So we really try to encourage mentors not to take on the role of parents. That's not what we're training them to do. We are all about permanency and helping young people to make permanent connections in their lives in different ways, and to think about family of origin and family of choice. We have lots of conversations about that, but what mentoring is and isn't can get muddied in times of crisis, especially when young people are no longer system supported. So again, back to Dr. Taussig's earlier point, that knowing that you have clinical support behind your mentors is equally as important as the mentoring relationship to the young person, that this is not something to be taken lightly or to be done on a shoestring budget. There's a lot of care and attention that goes into doing this well.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
And with that being said, I think that'll have to be the last question. We really want to thank our presenters for the wonderful presentation that they provided for all of us. We want to thank our audience and appreciate that everyone is able to spend their time with us today. We want to close out and just remind you about the National Mentoring Resource Center website for no-cost mentoring resources. OJJDP NMRC provides evidence-based reviews on mentoring models and mentoring for special populations, implementation resources for all of you, specifically training manuals, mentoring guides, research from our board, blog posts that feature innovations and best practices from practitioners, and of course, opportunities for no-cost training and technical assistance. Additionally, we encourage you to register your program with the Mentoring Connector. It's a national database of mentoring programs This zip code searchable database allows mentors and mentees from across the country to find your program and is connected to LinkedIn and MBA Cares and so many other avenues of free program promotion. And finally, as a reminder, 1 week from the webinar, all attendees will receive an email with a link to the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series webpage, where we will post the recording, the slides, and all other additional resources. And again, don't forget, we will have and expect to receive your feedback after today's webinar. Please answer the short survey to help make this series even better. And then be sure to visit the CMWS page on the Mentor website at mentoring.org for all archived past webinars and information about upcoming webinars. Our next topic is Fostering Youth Purpose in January at an upcoming date. We want to thank everybody again for joining us. Please enjoy your holiday season, and we look forward to touching base with all of you later. Thank you all. Have a great and wonderful holiday season. Bye-bye now.